found out this summer that Trailblazer would no longer be our MAC carrier, I thought, based upon my relationship with my CMDs, and I'll let Dr. Patterson talk about the relationship that podiatry has had with the two Trailblazer CMDs, and let you know that relationships between physicians and the CMDs who are also physicians is extremely important. So Dr. Patterson now is the vice president of, is it Novitas or Novitas?
Novitas.
Novitas Solutions up at Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. They hold the JH and the J12 contracts. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Deborah Patterson, who's been the CMD, one of the two CMDs down in Trailblazer for a number of years and a very good friend of mine.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the introduction. Paul's absolutely right that things had kind of been in flux. I agreed to speak to this group while the fate of the JH contract was still unsealed, and that thing became final in the spring, late spring, May or so, and we've been moving toward the final transition, which will happen in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. As Paul said, for many years I was one of the CMDs at Trailblazer, and Trailblazer, for those of you who don't know Trailblazer, originally Trailblazer was Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas. And then it did the work for the Medicare work, AB work for Texas. Little by little, it gathered up other states as CMS parsed those states out in a very different way back in the day. And then the first round of the MAC contracts came out in 2008. Trailblazer was awarded J4, which was the Texas AB work, as well as the AB work for Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. And at that point, I got to know several other members in this room, besides Dr. Kinberg. Dr. Kinberg and I have long been friends, having worked together now for 15 years with respect to podiatry issues in Texas. Then the second round of MAC contracting came up. Then along came this year, or late last year, when CMS decided that they would forge ahead with their second round of consolidations, which came to JH. Well, unfortunately, in the JH thing, Trailblazer lost, and Novitas, which was then known as Highmark, won that contract. That contract is still in transition. The final segment will be cutting over, it's the Part B work for Trailblazer on the November 17th, at which point Trailblazer will have no role in the MAC AB contracting. My job now has expanded from being a CMD to being the Vice President of Clinical Affairs and Executive CMD. What this means is that it's really the Vice President of Program Integrity. If you think about the way contractors are typically divided into operations, the people who receive your claims, receive your phone calls, receive your appeals, those people are the operational side, and then there's the integrity side. The integrity side includes the medical directors, the policy division, the medical review, the program, the outreach and education, as well as the data analysis, the informatics. And all of those areas are now under my I wouldn't say control, because it's far from controlled yet, but under my responsibility. Novitas, as I said, used to be known as Highmark Medicare Services, actually. It was a division of Highmark Blue Cross in Pennsylvania. It was sold in January to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, at which time Highmark Medicare Services became Novitas. The bottom line about who we are is that we now process claims for about a quarter of the country, about a quarter of the claim volume. When you add that to our sister company in Florida, which is called First Coast, the Florida Blue entity now controls over a third of all the Medicare AB claims. And so it's a large responsibility. That's the main thing that makes Novitas important, because we do affect many of you in the room. We now have Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, D.C., the District of Columbia, obviously, and not Virginia, but we have New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. When I sat down to make this slide presentation, I thought this is going to be like all slide presentations. It's going to be about 30 slides, and it'll be pretty typical. But then as I sat down to do it, I realized it's not typical. You guys are not the typical audience that I talk to. You guys are, to me, some of the people out in the world whom I look to most to help me in my day-to-day work as a medical director. Now, in my new job, I won't be doing the day-to-day work as a medical director, but the folks who will be doing that work report to me. And so I still have my medical director bent and my medical director hat, and probably always will. I've had the good fortune of having actually dealt with podiatric issues. And when I say podiatric issues, I want to make sure that I'm clear that I don't see podiatric issues as being just routine foot care and nail debridement. I see it being the entire spectrum of your scope of practice. All of the things that you're allowed by law to do, which, as you know, varies from state to state quite widely. Nobody knows that any better than me now, and of course Dr. Simon over the last 5 years in trying to get Trailblazer straight on that issue, because there is a lot of variability. But I've come to understand some things about CACs over the years, and I've come to understand some things about routine foot care and about surgery of the foot and ankle. And I've also learned an awful lot about dealing with carrier advisory committees. I've now dealt with 13 different committees. And so I think I can tell you I probably have as much experience with as many committees as anybody in this business from the contracting side. The one thing I want you to understand is that CACs truly are local. Their prime responsibility is one of those few things that's local, and that's local coverage determinations. They truly retain the local flavor that very often doesn't go away when they change contractors. I've been now 13 different CACs in several jurisdictions with 2 different contractors, and I learned something new with every single one of them. I have yet to actually meet the Mississippi CAC, but I will in a couple of weeks. I've met all of our others, and I've seen the same thing played out, is that everyone is a little bit different. It's different with respect to composition. It's very different with respect to format. And it's very different with respect to culture, how this group actually works together. And above all, it's different with respect to effectiveness. Some CACs are highly effective, some barely effective. People don't show up, some people don't phone in, some people show up but have no idea why they're there. All of these things, of course, are not unique, because the same thing's true with contractors. The contractor medical directors are a very variable group. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different personalities. We all have different sensibilities. We all have different degrees of ability to deal with conflict and with conflict resolution. And above all, we have a lot of differences at our contractor with respect to tactics. One of the things that I would tell you is that there are some commonalities. Even though there are widespread differences, there are commonalities. one thing that's common in all of our CACs is that a large number of the members are long on opinion and short on evidence. That's not a one-way street. I think CMDs are like that too. I think hopefully as we all evolving away from Medicare coverage by what's community standard and what we've always done, and moving into a world of Medicare coverage by evidence. In general, my observation is that the non-surgical people on our CACs are more involved than the surgical people. There is a big hole in that, though, and it's when it comes to you guys. I classify you guys as the surgical side. You guys are surgeons, largely, and for surgeons, you are way more involved than the other surgeons that we have in our groups. The Podiatric Medical Association and this organization, this room full of people here, I would say are probably the most highly organized folks on all the CACs from a national perspective. I put you right up there with Ash and Asco, the oncologists, who are probably second best. And then all down at the bottom of the list are the orthopedists, who I've come to learn in the last 6 months to a year have only just discovered that there are CACs and that there are policies and that Medicare has rules. And I think that the AAOS and the American Hip and Knee Society they're trying to get up to speed to be the organization that you guys are with respect to CAC and CAC input and CAC influence. I would say your primary job is always, and always will be, which what the manual says your primary job, is to help us write policy. It's to be an advisory group for local coverage determination development. That is your number one purpose. And to that extent, the way that you can be most effective, and I think the most effective CAC members, and there are several sitting in this room right now that I would call very effective, and I know that from working with them. I'm assuming the rest of you are as equally effective. The really effective ones understand what LCDs are and what LCDs do. I encourage you, if you don't know exactly how your contractor uses LCDs, that is a big local flavor. Contractors don't use LCDs the same way. I have now 2 divisions of contracting, 2 different contracts whose LCDs were not designed to do the same thing. JH policies were designed largely by Trailblazer because they came from Trailblazer largely. They were designed to operate only in, or mostly in, an automated claim processing world. They were designed, and the only time Trailblazer ever had LCDs were if there was an opportunity to do auto adjudication of claims, because that's the only time that an LCD is really required. LCDs are expensive, they're laborious, they're time-consuming, they're troublesome, they're a source of great contention. They have a wonderful place, but we did not write LCDs just to have policies. If we intended to review claims manually, we did not always write LCDs because we did not have to. And then we don't have to go to all of the trouble, all of the difficult issues of maintaining them, keeping them up to date, and all of the paperwork associated with it. This is very different from some contractors. Some contractors write an LCD for everything, and their LCDs adjudicate nothing. You would read the LCD and think that, oh, if I send in this claim that says this is non-covered, that it'll get denied and the beneficiary will be responsible if I get a waiver, an ABN, and yada, yada, yada. But that's not always the case because not all contractors implement their LCDs in a world of automation. We discovered this very quickly when we did the first transition of the J4. And it's one of the things that I wanted the folks at Novitas to understand going into JH, because they had never really dealt with a bunch of states that were so different from the states they were accustomed to. And in fact, it is true that Novitas did not always automate their LCDs. So rule number one is understand what LCDs are intended to do in your jurisdiction. And if you make the assumption then, and get with your medical directors if you don't understand how a policy is intended to be implemented, because implementation is 90% of a policy. It can say whatever it wants to, but unless it actually stops claims, it may not have the effect you expect it to. That doesn't mean that you're not held to it if your claims are ever questioned. If your claims are ever questioned in a medical review world, then the contractor will rely on what's in that LCD, as will the first level of appeals. Sometimes the quick level of appeals will actually honor an LCD, and occasionally an ALJ will honor an LCD. But you have to understand what the responsibilities are. So that's rule number one, is understand what policies do. And if you don't understand where a policy falls in the medical necessity world of determining what's reasonable and necessary, we can certainly show you to that section of the manual so you can put this in the hierarchy of what it means with respect to medical review, automated policies, and automated adjudication, and NCDs, and so forth. Members get out of the CAC process what they put in. Those of you who come prepared, who come having read the policy, having thought through what the policy really says, having bounced it off of your colleagues already, some of your trusted colleagues, having bounced it off your national association, for those of you who in this room have a close association with your national association, coming to the meeting prepared to give expert commentary is ever so important. Understand also, though, that each and every one of your contractors may not use the same time frames. They may not say, okay, I'm going to bring this draft, and then after I bring this draft, then we're going to determine where it needs to be changed. Some contractors try their best to go into a CAC meeting already having troubleshot, already having discussed with the relevant parties what the issues may be. This is something that's different at Novitas between the two contracts. Trailblazer typically took a draft policy, exactly what I mean, a draft policy. This is our first cut at this policy, and that everything is up for grabs after the fact during the comment period, and that's when we expected to get all of the discussion. If that's not the way your contractor does it, find out. And I would encourage you guys, as you move into these larger and larger regions, you're going to be affected more by variability like that, where you may run into medical directors and companies who do things very differently than what you've done in the past. So understand what the lay of the land is and what the expectations are. As Paul mentioned, it's not just policy development. Over the years, we've learned to rely on our CAC members for much more. We rely on you as a window to your specialty. We rely on you to get this word out to your colleagues that this new policy is coming. And if you have any comments, now is the time to get them in. We also have relied on our CAC members strongly. Dr. Kinberg, no exception. It may even be the poster child for working with a contractor to solve issues. And so is Dr. Simon, and so is Dr. Rayum, and so is Dr. Morris, and the others that I've worked with. You guys have a little bit of a catbird seat in that you have my email address, and you have my phone number. Not everybody has that. Coming to the meetings, being prepared, getting these policies out, all of these things are so very important to make this LCD development what it was intended to be, and that is the local community of physicians' only source of input. It's your only reliable source of input into Medicare policy. You have some input into national policy, but not that much, let's be honest. When a single organization is taking comments from the mass in Maine, they listen to large organizations. I think a PMA will respond to them and to CMS on big issues, and they will listen to APMA. What likelihood is it that anybody at CMS is going to listen to a sole practitioner out in East Bovina, Texas? It's pretty unlikely. There's strength in numbers, but at the CAC level, it's one-to-one. We hear everybody, and we hear you guys loud and clear. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that the degree to which physicians understand how CMS wrote their rules and what their expectations were is very variable. I think you are the one group who begins to understand a few things. One thing is that CMS expects that doctors will do the right thing. I think that's a reasonable expectation. I think that hopefully everyone in this room expects that doctors will do the right thing. Unfortunately, we all know doctors who haven't done the right thing, and we need to always be mindful that we cannot let bad actors influence the way policy is written. We cannot write policy to deal with bad actors. Now, sometimes we do throw things in policies that are intended to stop bad behavior. I'm not so sure that it's always the right thing to do. We sometimes do it out of desperation. The other thing that CMS expects is that just because they put it out on their website, or just because they had contractors put it out on their websites, that everybody's going to read it, understand it, and apply it. Well, that's pretty naive. Even if we tried, I don't know that we could always do it, because very often what's written out there is written in bureaucratic gobbledygook, and it's really difficult to know what context it goes in. With the growth of the World Wide Web, it's also we're totally inundated with stuff. You know, how do you characterize it? How do you contextualize it? Where does it fit if it's contrary to what we've always known before? Documentation, well, unfortunately, documentation's not policy, but you guys have gotten, all policies come with documentation rules. This is where you're very, very, very important to us in getting the word out to folks, is that not only do they need to do the right thing, but they need to document it. Duh. And then, of course, CMS believes that everybody will only send claims in for services that met all of these requirements. That's the hard part. How do you get people to do that? That's where local coverage determinations are largely sprang up as a way to automatically adjudicate claims. We get 1 million claims a day, or just under 1 million claims a day. Can't look at all of them. Got to have a way to handily deal with them to get your money to you without too much interruption. And so there's where the LCDs come into big play. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try my best to answer them. I'm still going to throw the I'm new at this card, because I really still am new at the Novitas way. And when I started working at Trailblazer, I was told I could be new for a year. Then it was 5 years, and now I'm going to tell you, even after having done this for 15 years, it's still all new almost every day. So you're not alone if you think that the wheel gets reinvented every night. If we're kind of like Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill, and then the next morning the rock's at the bottom of the hill again. Questions?
Yeah, Mark Dollard, CAC member for Novitas in the metro area. Good to see you.
Which state? In which state?
Virginia.
No,
Metro
in the
DC.
past, yeah.
Yeah, good to see you again. we've often talked about when we set those LCD policies, it becomes a sacrosanct deal between us and the CMDs and what's going on. One of our big problems is this MedLearn network that seems to come in and redefine what we've historically hashed out over the many, many years. How is this relationship with MedLearn network that seems to come in and now defeat some of the understandings we have with the LCD policies?
Good question, Mark. MedLearn is something that CMS Central Office has imposed on all of us. It's not something that the contractors particularly wanted or needed. MedLearn is, those articles are typically written by a third-party contractor that CMS Central Office works with. I think they've experienced what you're talking about is where the MedLearn people were instructed to just write what was in the manuals and what was in national policy and not reinvent anything, but I think the effect sometimes of the way words are strung together can have the effect of changing policy. CMS is understanding this now, and I know on the couple of things that have come up lately, they've actually vetted these MedLearn articles very heavily with the contractors before ever publishing them. So to answer your question is, I think that any change in policy that comes out of MedLearn is unintended. And if you see one of those MedLearn articles that seems to be changing policy, you need to just let your contractor, medical director, or your PO person at the contractor understand that so we can get it fixed.
Another area that befuddles us is the RAC audits. And I think you've dealt with some Connolly RAC audits, particularly with place of service, that affected 10,000 different practitioners.
Right.
How beholding are you to these RACs, and how much subject are you subject to their, enslaved to their
Enslaved, I like that. I have to be careful when I answer your question. The RACs are a specific contract that was made between them and CMS outside of our contract. They are required to follow all national and local instructions, all national and local rules, all national and local policies. To the extent that they do that, however, is between them and CMS. It's not between them and us. If they ask us to take, our role is simply as a conduit for them to effectuate claim decisions. We have, and so we're not beholden to them in any way. We are, well, I'll take that back. We're beholden to CMS in all matters, and we're beholden to CMS to try and sort out issues that we recognize between our providers and the RAC. To an extent, we're not tasked with that, nor are we specifically paid for that, but we are expected to try and help sort things out. If you have a RAC that has stepped over the bounds, probably your best way to deal with that is to report it to the MAC, but also report it to CMS.
In terms of the RAC, is the issue we had with the 25 modifier in your intercession in that any thing that you could discuss with the group?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Paul and I dealt with an issue that probably affected everyone in this room and to some degree, and that was when Connolly, well, maybe not everybody, but anybody who's within Connolly's area, Connolly decided to recoup money for E&M services that were performed on the same day as a 0 or 10-day global procedure. Well, those of us who've read the manual know that the manual says that the 25 modifier requirement's not intended to be applied to new patient services. It specifically excludes certain E&Ms from the requirement of a 25 modifier. And so Connolly was wrong. Although we didn't know they were wrong until they had recouped a bunch of money. And then it came to our attention, and we were able to bring that up with Connolly. We were able to bring that up with CMS. And of course, it's outside of my ability to affect what Connolly does. I don't rule them, and they don't rule me. But, you know, we gave the message, and we gave the message to CMS. And I think eventually Connolly changed what they were doing. And I do believe we made mass restitution of the money. Did we not, Paul? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sharon Root from New Jersey, and we're new to Novitas.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, and you as well. We have been informed that there is a new LCD that takes effect on November 15th in regard to nerve injections of the foot. And
Okay.
one of the problems that I see with this particular LCD is that it gives you a limit on how many injections can be given to the lower extremity, but it has no consideration for bilateral. It has no consideration for extra site. It just leaves the number of injections as 3 within a 6-month period. Is there any way to reconsider location? Because I agree with the term that you're not going to inject the same site over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But in the foot, especially with lower extremity, there are many sites that can be injected. And our members are going to have a problem with this particular area.
You know, actually, I think what you're talking about right there is exactly what I was talking, is how were they planning to implement this policy? Were they planning to say 3 injections and you're out, which is inappropriate, or were they planning to do this in a manual review world? And if they're doing it in a manual review world, then they can take into consideration which nerve we're talking about, which foot we're talking about, and what were the clinical reasons. So I guess that's one of those things that should always be sorted out during the comment period, and then also sorted out, you know, if you put in a comment to your CAC on a draft policy and then see the final policy still looks the same, and you see that we're headed toward a train wreck, that's where a phone call to your CMD probably is the quickest, most expeditious way to deal with it. Yes.
Dr. Patterson, my name is Harry Goldsmith. We've talked on the phone.
Hi, Gary. Nice to meet you.
I have a question. This is a Medicare Advantage question, but it's not. It's essentially Medicare Advantages, and we're hearing complaints from a number of our doctors that are deviating away from either national coverage determinations or local coverage determinations, and they're setting up guidelines that are reducing benefits.
Okay.
Now, I'm not talking about 90-day edits for routine foot care. I'm talking about other things. How can we enlist a CMD, non-Medicare Advantage, to help us, in other words, educate the CMD, I assume, for Medicare Advantage plan, that in fact these are the guidelines that we use in this region, and we'd like you to conform with that? Or is there a different mechanism that either the state associations or individuals should go through to get that corrected?
Harry, the interaction between the Medicare fee-for-service CMDs and all of the different Advantage plans is extraordinarily variable. I have regular routine discussions with only one Advantage plan medical director. Only one seeks my advice as to what's the right thing to do. This is the way I would suggest you do it, is if it's a local issue, a local one plan, like a little plan doing something funky, that's very easy to call me up or have your members call up the CMD and say, look, here's the problem we're having, can you help me? I don't usually just pick up the phone and call that plan. I then usually go through my regional office and say, somebody in the regional office, whoever handles these plans, I need some help. And very often the regional office will solve the problem. Sometimes the regional office will get me and the other person together and we'll hash it out, and their misunderstanding goes away. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen. It goes up to the central office. But, you know, if a plan is being recalcitrant on purpose, then that's something CMS central office needs to handle. And that's where, and it's also true where the large multi-state kind of plans, like the Cignas and the Aetnas and the Humanas and all of those, probably need to start at the central office. And I would say you can always get CMDs to help you get into the central office.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mark Block. First Coast Services is actually my carrier. Question I have deals with articles. When an LCD is in a draft form, we're given the courtesy of commenting on it, and many times our comments are become an integral part of the policy. An article, on the other hand, is not handled, at least to the best of my knowledge, the same way a draft is, or an LCD, yet the article is used as a means for assisting in adjudicating claims that are associated with the LCD. So the issue I have is that we can provide input, and many times it becomes an integral part of the LCD draft, yet and that's not the case with an article. Additionally, what could potentially happen, and I've argued this, is that if a RAC comes in, we know what's in the LCD, we've had some input in that. I was told initially that the LCD is the bottom line as far as how the claim is adjudicated, but then in questioning it further, I made the argument, well, if they're actually using the LCD, they're using the article to assist them in adjudicating the claim. So there's a disparity there. Can you comment on that and how
Sure.
we can actually have an input in an article, which may be a very significant part of the policy?
Okay. Did you have a talk with Jim Corcoran about
Yes.
that? What did he say? Because the reason I'm asking is because my understanding of when you know, back in the day when you had a single document that had reasonable and necessary, as well as coding, documentation, all the other kind of stuff that you typically now see in an article, that CMS told us to divide that up, have two documents, because we want one with reasonable and necessary, that the ALJ, that everybody is, you know, supposed to give considerable deference to, and has the authority for claim adjudication, but then have everything else in an article. If it's important to have it out there, put it in an article, because then it's not challengeable by an ALJ. If somebody wants to challenge the content of reasonable and necessary, it becomes clear to the ALJ. It's all in the LCD. It's not in the article. Whatever's in the article, you can't go after. You have to leave that alone. But if there's something that's been published in a draft article that's going to cause problems, I would hope that Jim would understand that, or whoever would understand it, and work with you on it. Well, I think anytime you see something in that article that seems to be needing work, feel free to comment on it. I'll take comments on anything and everything I can get my hands on if it's going to help me do what we need to do. And especially if we put something out there in an article that says we're going to require something or other, and by doing so we would inadvertently do something we don't really want to do, then I need to know that. So the answer to the generic question is feel free to comment. Anytime you see one of those out there, and anytime even after the policy is finished. The nice thing about articles is they don't have to go through comment and notice. There's no requirement that says they go through comment and notice, just the LCD. But we put the articles out there, at least we did, for this purpose, is so we can get comments on them and understand what kind of troubleshooting we need to do. So comment.
So again, for my own edification, if I have an understanding of an LCD and I base my billing, or any provider does, on the LCD, the article can still be an issue as far as how the claim is adjudicated. The final word is not really the LCD. It's the LCD
Well,
in the
there should
article,
there
correct?
should be nothing in that article that implies reasonable and necessary. Anything that speaks to reasonable and necessary needs to be in the LCD. The only thing that can be in the article is coding instructions and things that are non-R and N. Now, if something in that article is actually reasonable and necessary, it needs to be repeated from the LCD only. It cannot appear there by itself. So if you're seeing something in an article that looks to you like reasonable and necessary, that's where that needs to be discussed, because it should not be there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Question? I'm Dave Freeman from the Maryland CAC, so J12. To follow up on the question about the new LCD that goes in effect on 11/15 for the peripheral nerve injections, we talked a lot with Dr. Moynihan before this came into effect during the draft policy, and it seems like one diagnosis code was left off. The concept was that there were certain diagnosis codes that were being billed that were inappropriate. So there's a laundry list of diagnosis codes that are excluded. There are currently only 4 diagnosis codes that are listed as included, and one that was left off is 729.2, and that's neuritis. Now, you can have other peripheral nerves like sural nerve that has to need a therapeutic nerve injection, but it will not be covered under the new policy because there's no diagnosis code like there is for carpal tunnel or tarsal tunnel, et cetera. So there's a policy problem with this, and I know that she was trying to exclude certain codes. That code is not excluded. It doesn't include it, and if it's not included according to the policy, it won't be paid for.
Okay. You know what, both of you guys send me an email so that I'll remember to bring this up with Eileen.
All right.
And try and get it sorted out before the 15th if we can, and if not, as soon after the 15th as we can get it done. My email address, okay, are you ready? It's really pretty easy. It's just like Eileen's, only it doesn't go to Eileen. It goes to Deborah, D-E-B-R-A, .Patterson with 2 T's, at highmarkmedicareservices.com. Now, eventually, that will change to Novitas Solutions, but for now, it's Highmark. Until we get fully off of their computer system and off of their email servers, it'll be Highmark. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.